social media and books or reading? Which comes easily to you?
Well, okay, so that's a very interesting question. Uh, for social media, I would say books easily come to me. I mean, I spend most of my time doing a lot of reading, and then not just doing a lot of reading, but there's that adrenaline rush when you find yourself in the library. So usually over the weekends, I spend quite a lot of time in, especially in the BAM library, trying to uncover something new. And it takes you into different worlds because on every shelf you come across something you have not encountered before. And you encounter those in a certain space. So for instance, you walk into the BAM Library Africana section, and then a particular shelf is telling you a story of what happened when Ghana gained independence. And then you move a step further and you are looking at pre-colonial history. So it's like you have a whole compendia of history being laid before you. Social media, it it has this addictive, magnetic nature where it draws you in because it's an everyday thing. People, I mean, just I think about barely 24 hours ago, I hear there's been at the Oscar Awards, there's been an interesting development. And wherever you check, even if you are not on social media, you budge into an office and people are talking about it. So you realize that social media has virtually been encoded into everyday life. So yes, I'm more into books. Books easily come to me, but social media is now a space you cannot escape from. It's like wherever you pass, there's an element of social media, not necessarily an app, but infused in everyday life. So there's a wrestle, let me put it that way. But books are my go-to thing, yeah.
Okay. Now, you mentioned books. Has it always been something with you since you were young? Reading.
Well, so I actually did not grow up in a family where, I mean, we had enough. So my mom was a seamstress, what we call now, I mean, in the past we call adieye. Now, I mean, people have all kinds of names, fashion designer, but I mean, the crux of it all is that they are sewing something, they are trying to put bits and pieces of things together. So growing up, I mean, my mom was not educated, and so she realized that the only way she could develop her kids' was to get them things like books. So even though she could not read, mostly anytime she's coming back from her normal vocation, she will bring along books she couldn't read. And you could imagine that sometimes she sits beside you when you're doing your homework. She has no idea what you're doing, but she says, "Oh, this thing, you should have done it this way." She has no clue. So for me, it was more of my mom. It was more of my mom. And then also, I had very good teachers. So, for instance, when I was growing up, we used to have this English teacher back in basic school who used to train us in terms of debating and all those things. And those things, that kind of practice calls for a certain level of dedication for you to always be abreast with times. And if you could not afford the internet, I mean, at a young age, I was going to the internet cafe and all that, but books were everywhere. So for me, that was how I came to this whole arena. Yeah.
And how helpful has it been since you developed that habit?
Well, so the one of the things, I mean, when it comes to books, it's pretty difficult quantifying the impacts of books on our lives. Why do I say so? Not too long ago, I met Prof. Quason. So, realize, I mean, and this is something I do very often. So, I met Prof. Quason not too long ago, who autographed his book, I mean, barely an hour ago before I just walked in here. And this is what he wrote: to Reginald, for the shared love of language, all good things, Ato Quason. And this is someone I met because of my love for language. And I'll link it directly to books because it's in reading books that it draws you into other like minds, like Prof. Quason. So these are some of the things that I've encountered. And then also it has brought me to the higher echelons in terms of scholars. So yes, books will shape your mind, but it also draws you to people who think deep enough to reflect on life. So let me give you an instance. There's Nana Aredamwa. I don't know whether you've encountered Nana Aredamwa, but when you talk about books now in Ghana, you can't talk about books without mentioning Nana Aredamwa. And these are people I encountered because of my love for books. And also, they will share nuggets of life with you. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was at the Tang Palace. We went for an excursion. And the owner, Mr. Tang, one very, quite an old man but young at heart, made a very interesting expression. He is from the Tang dynasty. And he made an interesting remark that books will teach you and will take you places where it will take you years to get there. And why was he saying so? He was pointing us in the direction of memoirs that were written by people, anecdotes, people reflecting on their lives. In reading that, it gives you an insight in the paths that people have tread in the past and how to avoid certain bottlenecks in life. Ordinarily, the wisdom, as our elders would say, doesn't reside in the head of one person. So in reading books, in encountering minds that have existed in the past, you realize that, oh, probably I get to a point, you remember that maybe somebody has been there before, and then you find your way around it. Let me give you a practical example. We always are talking about various problems facing Ghana in terms of economics, in the economic realm. Now, if one of the things I've consistently intimated is the fact that I believe Ghana has not taken her economic history seriously. And these are chronicled on papers. Some have been well documented in books like Tony Killick's Economic History. You have something like Stephen Heimer and all these people who have written about the economic history of Ghana. Now, if we were paying very close attention, some of the mistakes that we are making now, we will not make most of these mistakes. About 3 months ago, I encountered a document that indicated the first time President Nkrumah planted sugar cane at Commander Sugar Factory. And then people were surprised that this has existed all these years. And you look at the narrative now in the past 3-4 years since that story caught fire, you realize that nothing has changed. So if we are paying very close attention to books, we will not repeat some of these mistakes. Social media for me, in fact, by way of confession, I start my day with social media, interestingly, even though I love books. So ordinarily, the first two things I would do definitely is to check social media. And what would I do? I'm more or less a Facebook enthusiast. When I pick my phone when I wake up, at least I'll check my itinerary for the day. Check my calendar, what schedule do I have here and there. Then the next thing I'll do is to check my Facebook. Not what people have written, but there's an interesting section on Facebook called Facebook Memory. So Facebook Memories tells you what you have written on that day. So let's say today is 28, right? So when I take my Facebook, I check my Facebook memory, I'll see what I wrote last year 28, probably 2 years 28, or even 3 years 28. So then I evaluate. Was I thinking straight a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? So for me, it helps me uh, track my development, whether by way of self-reflection, because sometimes on the spur of the moment you must have written something, and then after 6 months, after a year, after 2 or 3 years, you look at it and say, no, I mean, with that extra knowledge you've arrived at, probably what you were saying a year ago was not so deep as our contemporaries would say. So that's how frequent. And then when so in the, I mean, first thing, one of two things to do in the morning, and then before I get to work, I mean, I live in Kasua, so I spend a lot of hours in traffic. So when the traffic is neck deep, sometimes you want to check what is happening, and I use that to keep pace. Sometimes you get people, I mean, I have a lot of people who ply the same routes, so it helps me know probably where there's traffic and all that. So people use social media for all kinds of things, but in my frequency depends on what I want to do in a day. So morning, yes, then midday, then in between lunch, that's if I have lunch, I'll use that time to catch up on what is happening in the media space. Because for instance, maybe I could be in this part of town, I want to go to Tema in the next 2 hours. By flipping through my Facebook page, I could easily tell that maybe there's probably, unfortunately, been an accident, or there's some bad traffic on the Tema motorway. Something that will help you plan your day. So morning, midday, and then before I go to bed, I try to look at what has transpired so far in the virtual space. And then if I have a comment or two, I just contribute and then retire to bed. So that's my frequency.
Okay, so from where you stand, would you say there's a major relationship, or there's a relationship between social media and reading?
Well, there is actually. So, as I said earlier on, I mentioned that when you mention social media, there are several ways of looking at it. Back in the days, our social media was when our parents gathered us by the fireside, and then all kinds of ideas were springing forth. But now it's been, technology has sort of mobilized it, let me put it that way. So I see a relationship, right, in that. So on social, right on that platform, you can find like minds where you get to read. And that relationship, for me, there's a thin line between social media and then reading. Reading will be more focused, I mean, requiring some level of deliberate attention. Social media, you really do not have to be deliberate, I mean, in terms of the level of focus. But I marry the two because wherever I decide to spend my time, there has to be value. So, how probably A will look at social media, I'll look at it differently. So, if I'm scrolling, I have metrics I'm looking out for. I join particular groups, I follow particular journalists, I follow particular economists, I follow particular comedians. It's a mix of it. So in there, I read because people will write something very prolific. For instance, you following someone like, there's a professor a Nigerian professor in on Facebook, Moses Ochonu. He's one of the brilliant minds. I spent hours rummaging through his speech, and I confessed earlier in the year. I wrote a post about that I spent quite a lot of time on social media, rummaging through the pages of some of these prolific thinkers. For me, that is a book. because you look at their level of thinking. These are not people who might, yes, they publish books, all right, but aside what they publish, they share very insightful nuggets that may not end up in the academic sense of scholarship, but it will guide you into certain uncharted territories. So there is a relationship. Reading, yes, we want to separate it, but I think that there's a very close relationship between these two, depending on your definition of either of them. Yes.
Okay, so now there's the assertion that with the advent of technology and social media, reading is becoming less of a thing, especially for the youth. So people are becoming increasingly lazy readers. Do you subscribe to that?
Well, so I would not want to take a very hard line position on that, because it's true that the internet holds about, in terms of reading material, I mean books. 2 weeks ago, I remember when they were launching the same Professor Atukweson's relaunching the book Oxford Street. I don't know whether you've come across it. So about 2 weeks ago, we launched it, and he made a remark in that light. As one of his students had actually asked him that, I mean, is there currently an impact of social media reading habits? And then one thing that we came to a consensus on, I mean, beyond that presentation or that launch, was that definitely there has been an impact in terms of the fact that maybe about 30, 40 years ago, there were community libraries. There was no social media. When you wake up, all you saw were libraries and books and people who were enthusiastic about sharing what they had read from a certain book. And there were competitions. There were literally literary clubs all over. And this was not just Accra. I mean, right even from independence to the early, let me say, 80s, there were literary clubs all over where they were sharing nuggets. Now, with the advent of social media and the absence of social media literacy, so the advent of social media, we should have smartly coupled it with some level of literacy. It's like giving somebody a grenade. A grenade, the fact that you're holding a grenade does not mean you should just pop it. It could be a way to scare others from attacking you. But somebody holding a grenade will, by impulse, use it in attacking. When we had social media, that was our arsenal. We were supposed to at least come with that level of knowledge. So when you check something like the Harvard Business Review, not too long ago, they were talking about including, not talking about, in fact, some have already begun in some jurisdiction where there's social media literacy. So we have left social media as a breathing monster where people do not understand what social media entails. So they go there and it's like they flow with a tide. But if we have that knowledge of what social media represents, clearly there will be a different approach to tackling the use of what? Social media. So for the African setting, when you check, you go through the literature to ascertain what the impact of social media has been in especially the African enclave, you realize that most of the research are tilted. You will be amazed at negative impact. Negative impact. When you just do a search, you see that anytime someone will frame a research as the impact of social media on reading. Last night I was just perusing just to see if something has changed. I realized Not much has changed. There was a research from KNUST, there was a research on basic schools, and then one very recently on new Edibiase. And all we're talking about the negative, the negative, the negative. So when you want to approach the issue on an already preconceived notion, you will find what you already want to see. So yes, it's had a negative impact mostly in our parts of the world and in other jurisdictions because we decoupled social media literacy from social media. It should have been hand in hand. There's a research by Pew Research. So Pew Research does a lot of fascinating work. And when you check the volume of books, the market, the reading business in the US and in other jurisdictions, you realize clearly that even though there has been a decline in reading habits at the advent of social media, you can clearly see that ours, juxtaposing our situation with most of the developed world, ours is a dire situation. Yes, people are still buying hardcover books. We do not have rigorous information desk where we are able to harvest this information to do a comparative analysis. But from the anecdotal research reports that you keep getting from various quarters, you can clearly see that social media has definitely impacted negatively in our space. But there are few, young people who are capitalizing on that platform to more or less like as a springboard to accelerate their development. And I want to believe that, I fall within that space because of probably the kind of people I ended up associating with when I was introduced to social media. So yes, there has been some negative impact, but there has been lots of positives. Let me give you an example. So on Facebook, for instance, you have Ghana Studies Association. This is, let me say, a group or a colloquial of scholars, not only Ghanaian scholars, people who are interested in studies relating to Ghana. On that study, few minutes ago before you called me, I realized someone had posted, a scholar had posted something on the Wulome, the Ghana Wulome, saying that anyone who is interested in that level of scholarship can contact her. And then there's a Prof. Radbone, Richard Radbone. He wrote this book, Nkrumah and the Chiefs. Fascinating book, trying to look at the relationship between Nkrumah and then the Chiefs. And that's when Nkrumah became president, that kind of record. It tells you that I wouldn't have gotten to know some of these things absent social media. Yes, I would have probably encountered it in the library, but I am doing that at an accelerated rate as compared to. So social media will provide you with that space where hitherto what you would have struggled to mobilize, it presents it to you on a silver platter. But then, of course, you must know how to harness that plethora of energy that is given to you on that mere footing. So those are my thoughts on the impact of social media.
So that would be, for want of a better word, your solution to the decline in reading because of social media. The fact that people can actually harness social media as a tool and use it to improve their literacy.
Exactly. So let me do a brief reflection. So there's this concept. I always ask people. It's an anecdotal study I'm doing, just a casual discourse I do with people. So if I encounter anyone, I try to find out, okay, do you have TikTok on your phone? So, okay, yeah, I do. Okay, so what value is TikTok presenting to you? And why did you download the app? So maybe to while away time, to see what is happening. And then I asked her, okay, have you any idea probably how TikTok came to be? Like, what necessitated TikTok? I told a gentleman not too long ago that I skip all Ghanaian content on TikTok. It sounds a bit discriminatory, but I told him I didn't care because they were not adding any value. And the algorithm is so intelligent that it has realized that I really don't enjoy Ghanaian content because it's all kinds of things. People displaying all kinds of things I cannot say on record. But when you follow some other platforms on the same TikTok, people are teaching you how to use Excel. People are teaching you how your laptop works. So there are some people I follow on TikTok. Every day I learn how to something I don't know about my laptop. And this is on TikTok. Meanwhile, others are using it for all kinds of things. Now let's come back to Facebook. There's a struggle. There's a struggle. In the Christian cosmology, we say, oh, light struggles with darkness. That is the same struggle I see on social media and then reading. But it's about how you understand it. There's this scholar called Erwin Goffman. Goffman is one of the theorists who tried to look at the philosophy of social media. Now, he wrote a book about self. I've forgotten the exact title, but it's about self, conceptualizing of self in everyday life. This philosopher also, Habermas, there's a philosopher also called Habermas, and then one American ethno-methodologist called Harold. Is it Garfinkel? I always forget his surname. Now, they looked at what we call the self which was conceptualized by Shakespeare in terms of theater, right? Now, what Goffman did was that he said the self is what we portray, right? Is what we portray for people to see. So let me give you a practical example. On social media, right? It's just a fraction of people who walk you through their day when they wake up, when they brush their teeth, when they go to the loo. You can literally tell where they are every single minute. But there are certain things that these same people, even though their entire life is on air, they will never put certain things on social media. So see, these three scholars or thinkers that I have mentioned or I have invoked discuss what we call the self, that they portray what we call the dramatological analysis. Is in sociology is something that we call a microanalysis of social relations or social interactions, where we are all performers. So social media is like a stage where everyone comes to portray a certain image that we want the world to have about us, a certain image. So Mr. A comes and says that, oh, today, that's why your MP can say, I paid a working visit to GNPC, we went to maybe also a Yoruba and all those things. He's not telling you certain things. There may be bad things in his community, all right. He's not telling you all these things. Back to what I'm saying. People use social media as a platform to portray a certain level of self, a certain level of intelligence, a certain level of knowledge about themselves and what they know and what they do not know. Reading, even though on the decline, there's some of the research I had cited from Pew and all that, in leveraging social media, people can follow very strategic people in society, not necessarily in Ghana, but what ideally you wouldn't have gotten on a silver platter. So for instance, Prof. Kwesi, Save for Facebook or social media, I wouldn't have met Prof. Kwesi. Save for social media, there are lots of thinkers or books I wouldn't have ever known. But on social media, you get people sharing all these pointers, telling you that, oh, there's this new research, there's this new book. So there's something I do on Facebook. I write Ghanaian Scholars Watch. It's something I do. So if, for instance, this week there's a program by a Ghanaian scholar, I project it, Ghanaian Scholars Watch, then Book Watch. So Book Watch, this is something books I find interesting, but I am Ghanaian bias. So books published by Ghanaians, once, unless I haven't seen it, once I have seen the book, I'll say, oh, this is a new book that has come out, that has been recently published. Or maybe this is a book I encountered in the archives or in the library, or somebody whispered to me, then I put it there. If I've read it, I'll indicate, oh, maybe I'm yet to read, or I have read this, and these are my synopses. Let me give you an instance. Prof. Lloyd Amwa of Legon, Political Science Department, he manages the Center for Asian Studies and all that. And he drew my attention, not directly, but indirectly. He made a post about Prof. Achu Aye, who had written his autobiographical work. I wouldn't have known. For somebody who loves reading, I wouldn't have come to that knowledge until Prof. Lloyd Amoa of Legon made that post that he's seen so and so book, he's just gotten a copy. He's encouraging people to fetch their own copy. So if I was in my own space, I wouldn't come to that knowledge. But in that, not only did I get the book, I read it and wrote a whole review and shared the review. Forgetting that, about some few weeks later, a book publisher had sent the review to the author, and he got in touch via mail, and he was, I mean, that was, so for me, social media, depending on how you use it, could actually be a platform for critical reading. So let's not decouple the two.
Okay. Now, my very last question. I mean, you've raised very salient points about the fact that the youth today are not really seeing the the
Utility.
exactly, or what they can, the benefits of social media, and so are using it for all the wrong reasons. What do you think is the way forward?
Well, I won't purport to know. I mean, whatever I'm going to say is not a silver bullet, but my little contribution is that there should be a deliberate policy. So this is not something, I mean, I know our governments will take forever to do this. I believe very strongly that it should start from the home, every home. This is something that will not cost as much. I mean, if you want to go through the government, it will take forever to do. So right from the home. If you're a dad, a mom, a sibling, an older sibling, who by virtue of age or circumstance has to supervise a younger sibling, or a mother or a father, you want to expose your child to social media, you should deliberately educate them on what social media is all about. Now, one of the things that before I elaborate further, we haven't understood, I don't think as a people we have understood social media. So before you understand where social media is today, right, there has been an evolution. Currently some will say we are in social media 4.0. Some are arguing that we are in social media 3.0. We started with 1.0, where it was more or less like just a text base, the computer or search engines just telling us it was a one-way street. Then we moved to 2.0 and there was a bit of interaction, and then 3.0 being run now on blockchains and all that, where you can now, is more or less like decentralized, where you can own. That's where the advent of content creators comes in. It's like there's a monopoly where you can sit in your home and literally carve a niche for yourself. This is a power equivalent of a missile. Why do I equate that to a missile? Because it deals directly with the mind. And the human mind is a terrible thing to waste. So if you are exposing somebody to something that can alter not just their conscious, but their subconscious, you have to equip them with some level of pedigree of knowledge where they can handle it. There's a reason why when you are a child, you are not given Shakespeare's sonnets to read at age 1. There's a reason. Because at that age, you do not understand what an iambic pentameter means. You don't understand that. It gets to a certain level, the brain matures to a certain level, and you are gradually being exposed to certain things because you have been socialized by certain experiences, by certain knowledge. As a people, we have to expose our kids to social media with the knowledge that we want them to utilize it to change, positively transform their lives. Practically, depending on where you find yourself on social media. If, for instance, I don't do a lot of Twitter, but I have an account on Twitter because of Bright Simmons. He provokes my mind. So anytime he sends something, I get a notification. That's the kind of setting I have. So I get a notification, oh, Bright is saying this about this. And I just check. Then what I have to read to bridge the knowledge gap, I do. So these are small ways of bringing yourself into, harnessing the power of social media. On Facebook, who you follow counts a lot. Deliberately, in my space, I will follow a journalist. Maybe right after this, I'll definitely, if you're on social media, Facebook, I'll end up following your account. Because as a journalist, you end up sharing information that affects our general welfare. So I have friends in My Joy and other places, Ghana Web, and all kinds of places. So if I scan social media in 5-10 minutes, I have a fair idea what is happening very critical issues that happen in the entire country. We cannot do away with social media. And if we cannot do away with this, we have to, as a people, deliberately school our people about how to strategically, take TikTok for example. Some Asian countries, you know what young people are using TikTok for? They are using TikTok to share things they are doing in terms of their advancements in technology. So maybe I've developed an app, then I share like a 30 seconds how the technology works. And you know the population of the Asians. Quickly, he doesn't have to go place to place pitching his idea. Quickly, it goes viral. Someone was like, oh, I want to invest in this. Then that is how they go. And also, aside harnessing the power of social media, we should have a different approach to social media. Social media is not just the YouTubes. YouTube is a formidable platform. You have places like Khan Academy, EDX, where you have all kinds of videos teaching you. So when people say, oh, social media is bad, I hasten to agree with that line of thought, because it is the same social media that has shaped my thinking. So anytime people look at it in a bad light, I try to ask, how are they using it? So one, strategic usage of social media, and then how to conceptualize it. There's also LinkedIn, for Christ's sake. People, I know lots of people who have gotten jobs, and LinkedIn is also, and it will amaze you that some people do not consider LinkedIn as social media. So social media is not just what gives you the entertainment, that adrenaline. No, there's more to it. So we should have a mind shift on the conceptualization of social media, and then we should also have a social media literacy program. We could start right from the basic schools. Let's not say, oh, don't go to social media. No. Because now we've realized that what you tell people not to do, they find illegal ways of doing it. So rather, we should teach them how to properly or strategically utilize social media. So that's my take.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So now I just want him to take a few shots of you
No, no, no.
reading